Help support the channel by heading to our merchandise store and picking up some of our great aircraft designs created by our graphic designer. We have everything from fighters to transport aircraft, which you can choose to have printed on t-shirts, mugs, stickers and much more. Head to the description below and click the links and pick up your design today. Thank you and enjoy. So Rick, can you talk us through the MCA concept of the Tornado?
Well, funny enough, I remember sort of my first contact with that was when I was a flight lieutenant and taking in those days what was known as the C exam. That was the exam you had to pass for promotion to squadron leader.
Okay.
And I did very little work for it, but there was an essay that I had to write, and it was about the MCA and what did I think of it and sort of why. And the concept and what have you, and sort of I wrote about that, and that helped me pass the C exam. And we're doing very little work, so I was quite surprised at that. But that was my first introduction. The MCA, I think the MCA concept was a great concept. I mean, clearly, it was the first time that the UK had gone into a program with other nations, but I suppose when I look back at the industry sort of as it was in the 1950s and 1960s, when really sort of Britain led the world, and then sort of how we changed since then, but at least we're still doing it, and we're still involved, and the MCA was a clever concept. Now obviously it was designed primarily as a bomber. And the fighter version was a derivative of the bomber. Those who argue sort of will always say that sort of you can never develop a fighter out of a bomber, but you can develop a bomber out of a fighter. And to some extent there's truth in that as well, because there's no doubt about it that the fighter version, which was ultimately an exceedingly capable aircraft, always had a few deficiencies which related to the bomber and what it was designed for. Mm-hmm. But I set my sights on sort of, looked at where I was in life, and I wanted to fly the Tornado, as I call it now, and I wanted to be, because I'd become a qualified flying instructor and done a tour at RAF Valleys, instructing on the NAT and what have you, and then I also sort of was a qualified flying instructor on the Phantom, so I knew that sort of I had the pedigree, and I've done a ground job in London, which was related to operational training. Okay. So I knew that sort of I was sort of, it must be in the frame, and I thought the timing is just right, and I went to Staff College, and that's what I want. I really wanted to be the man responsible for introducing the Tornado F2, as it was to start with, into RAF Service and Command, the Operational Conversion Unit, the first unit. I said that's, and I used to tell people, I'd say that's what I want. I went on my annual report. That was my first choice many times. Anyway, cut a long story short, at the end of Staff College, when we got our postings, I got what I wanted. So I was naturally, absolutely over the moon.
Yeah. And
that was my introduction to the job. I suspect that probably that wasn't the case, that the fighter sort of came out of the design. Mm-hmm. Because when the RAF looked at sort of what it was going to replace the Lightning and the Phantom with, and obviously there were a number of aircraft in the like the F-15 and F-16 and things like that, but it was the concept, and the concept was the requirement was for a long-range interceptor, recognising where the threat came from, and what we were sort of mainly going to be up against, and where we had to go to meet the opposition, which was a lot of the time a long way from the shores of the UK. So that really what drove, I suspect, and I don't know. Wasn't intimately involved in sort of the discussion that went on at the time. But that drove the thoughts of sort of turning the Tornado bomber version, the GR1, or derivative into a fighter. I mean, the two aircraft look like Tornadoes, except that the fighter version is slightly longer and has got a longer nose with the radar in it, and has got more fuel and different engines and things like that, and the avionics are totally different inside. But I think that was the decision to go down that route, and so at the start it was just the UK that was going for the fighter version. The Italians did get the fighter later on, but that was another story. But it was just the UK. UK sort of going for the fighter version of an aircraft that was basically overseen by 3 nations. No, I mean, first of all, long before the aircraft came in, well, there was always, there were people sort of tied up with the introduction of the aircraft. There was the Operational Requirements Office in London, and there was a design team set up, known as a course design team, to prepare for the arrival of the aircraft, to design the course, to see what we needed to do and things like that. Now, I came out of Staff College in December 1983, and I basically took command of the unit in May of 229 OCU in May 1984. The aircraft actually didn't arrive until November 1984. More about that in a moment. So when I came out, I went and did a quick refresher course on the Hawk at Brawdy, and then I did a refresher course on the Phantom. Because until the aircraft came into service, I was going to keep my hand in in the fighter world on the Phantom. So I did a.
That was big fun as well.
It was. It kept me fully current flying throughout the year. And then I joined a really first class bunch of chaps who'd been who'd been handpicked for the course design team. Chaps like Nobby Clark and Mark Michelafeno, who'd done a sterling job, supported by others. And I came in to command them, and we formed. So you could say that we were the nucleus of what came. So for the rest of 1984, really, we were preparing for the aircraft coming in the next year. As I say, we were all flying in the Phantom to keep our hand in as well. This was at RAF Coningsby. Later that year, the first engineers came. They came mainly from the Tornado, either from Triple TE at Cottesmore, or from the Tornado Weapon Conversion Unit at Honington. There were plenty of people sort of down there on the air side who'd been in the air defence world before, who were lobbying me hard to get to sort of come back to the air defence world, and many of them did. I got most of them brought back, because I'll stop on that one, because actually it was very interesting. I was introducing a new aircraft, and I had I was involved in a lot. For example, I was summoned down to the personnel department, and I literally sort of handpicked who I wanted to be the first crews to come and fly on the Tornado. Not all, but because there were some from the Lightning world who were coming in, who were already posted in. But those who I'd known from the Lightning world and the Phantom world, and who I knew proven capabilities in what we required on the OCU, I handpicked. The first, I forget how many it was, must have been first 8 or 10 crews, I think it was.
That's pilot and nav, I'm guessing.
Pilot and nav, yeah. So I was delighted with that. So I got the team that I wanted, really. I also was allowed to choose the number plate as well. It was 228 OCU was the Phantom conversion unit. I'd been on 229 OCU at Chimney years before, when I was going through training on the Hunter, and that was a period I particularly enjoyed down at Chivenor and flying the Hunter. So I thought 229 was up for grabs. So I thought 229 OCU appeals to me. So that's how we got 229 OCU. You know, it was my choice, and it got approved. And likewise, I asked for the number plate to be 65 Squadron. And the reason behind that was because 65 Squadron's got a very proud history from World War II and before. And also, my second tour on the Lightning was back at RAF Coldershall on the Operation Conversion Unit on 65 Squadron. So I'd been on 65 Squadron, so that, and I enjoyed that very much as well. So, and that was free, I knew, so that's what I want. The fact that it changed number plates later on to 56 Squadron is another story. I'd gone by that stage, but 65 Squadron I got, and I was delighted about that. So again, I got my way, you could say.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, so how does that work? So like you can just pick a squadron, and then like do you go to the top brass and say like this is what I want to call it, or like how does that work, Rick?
I can't remember exactly, but that's more or less what happened. Yes, I was asked for my thoughts on squadron number plates and number plate for the Operation Conversion Unit, and that's really what happened. And it went up, and it all got approved, obviously at a very high level, but it did get approved.
That's amazing. Yeah, so let's talk about the F2. What were your first thoughts on it? Like, obviously coming from, you know, the Phantom, like, do you think, like, this is going to be a capable jet?
Yeah, because, you know, I was going to an aircraft that I wanted to go and fly. It was on my sights. It was advertised. Here you've got an aircraft coming in that had this huge capability, that this radar that could track many targets, a weapon system that was going to include AMRAAM, missiles such as AMRAAM and ASRAAM, and also had a data link capability. So that was all sort of moving in the right direction. The fact that sort of most of it wasn't there when it came in is another story. But if I could just go back a little bit to just talk about it coming in. So as I said, we spent the majority of 1984 preparing for it to arrive, and it actually arrived on the 4th of November, or maybe the 4th or 5th of November, 1984. There's a photograph over there of the arrival of the crew's arrival, and I was in one of the first two aircraft.
Wow.
As was the Air Officer Commanding 11 Group at the time, a very well-known super chap, New Zealander Air Vice Marshal Ken Hare. So we were in the first two aircraft together with Dave Eagles, who was the Director of Operations at BAE Systems, Wharton, and had been sort of a Chief Test Pilot before, and Jerry Lee, who was the Chief Test Pilot. So, yeah, we flew in, landed, and that was the arrival of the first two aircraft. But I hadn't actually sort of done a course by that stage, and the aircraft were literally sort of dragged into a hangar for the engineers to play with for the next couple of months and get the lines marked on the hangar floors and just get familiar with everything. And then came the conversion to the F2, which I'd been involved in. There'd been discussions going on the Air to. We were going to be converted. The first 4 crews were converted by BAE Systems.
Oh, okay.
British Aerospace, as it was then, at their airfield up at Wharton. So that's where we went in January, and we were in 2 courses, a month apart. I was in the first course. The other pilot was a chap called Chris Stevens. Yeah, Chris Stevens, a super chap who'd come off Lightning, so I knew, and also had been a NAT instructor as well. And the first 2 navigators, who were Nobby Clark and Andy Lister Tomlinson. And then the second cruise followed a month later, and we did 17 sorties with BAE Systems. Our instructors were the test pilots there, super chaps. Anyway, cut a long story short, the whole thing, I returned to Coningsby in the 3rd aircraft to be delivered, with the 3rd aircraft, yeah. Myself and Nobby Clark, in, I think it was at the end of March 1985 by now, and that's really sort of when everything started. The second 2 crews came back a month later. and that's we had 4 crews, and then the build-up started. And to cut a long story short, we had 2 years. We had from that time onwards until December the 31st, the following year, 1986, to get the OCU built up and to get ourselves combat ready.
Combat ready.
Wow. So we were ready to instruct. We were combat ready because of delay in the aircraft. It was decided that 2 to 9 OCU 65 Squadron was going to be the first unit to be declared to NATO, and we were due to be declared on the 31st of December 1986. I'll say right from the outset, we made it.
You got it.
It was a challenge. It was a hell of a challenge.
I can imagine, yeah. So like this, how do you like declare to NATO? Like, does someone come in and inspect it, or you just say like, right?
Yeah, we had to get all the ticks in the box.
Right.
And that was a challenge. It was a challenge because, and I'll go through that. How was the aircraft? Well, the Tornado, it was a lovely aircraft to fly right from the start. It was a lovely aircraft. Quickly, you could convert to it because, I mean, particularly sort of people like me, I was pretty experienced by that stage. Flown Lightnings, Phantoms, and Gnats, and Hunters, and things. But it was a delight to fly. It was very easy to fly. The systems were very different. You could see the technology had moved on. Right from the start, you could tell where its deficiencies were, and the main deficiency was in the engines. Well, I'd say the main deficiency was in the radar. I'll come back to that in a moment.
That's what everyone's going to be asking.
But the engines lacked puff. I mean, I was used to a Lightning, which the engines were just fantastic, but just at all heights. Having come to the Phantom was a bit underpowered in the medium levels as far as we were concerned. But the Tornado, it was also lacking puff in the middle. It was super. It could have been designed for low level, and the engines were great under 5,000 feet. But between 5,000 and about 30,000 feet, you say, "Oh God, I want more puff." When you got supersonic, it improves again. You know, it's like a Greyhound when you got it supersonic with the wings back.
Oh, yeah.
So that was the main area. That was the first thing you noticed. The second thing was obviously on the radar. We had radar problems right from the start. Yeah, that was the big problem, and that was
the blue circle. Everyone says.
Well, the blue circle. Let me put that right. That is. It's very unfortunate that the aircraft got the nickname as the Blue Circle aircraft, which really followed it through, because by the time that aircraft went out of service, it was hugely capable, and all the problems had gone. Now, we only ever had 5 aircraft that had, quote, concrete in the nose. And they only had concrete in the nose. We came back from our course at Wharton with radars in the aircraft.
Okay.
So there were radars in the aircraft from the start.
So it's a bit of a myth then?
It's a myth. There were radars in the aircraft. The reason why radars, because we had so many problems with the radar, they had to be taken out of the aircraft and sent back to GEC to be modified. Mm. That's why we had that's why we had holes in the nose, as it were, for a while. Mm-hmm. It was because of the radar problems, not because we didn't have it right from the start. We did. It didn't work very well. I mean, the big problem was we as people have probably told you, it was just multi targets everywhere. Trying to identify the actual target was the real problem.
Yeah.
We got there in the end, and if I just talk about the radar, since we're on it, so we went through that, we built up, and everybody commented on it. They didn't like it. Nobody liked it, and it was a bit cumbersome to even operate, quite frankly, with the keyboards and what have you. But we do. I remember in 1986 it was, because we weren't going to declare without a radar that could do something. And I took a team from the Operation Conversion Unit down to Strike Command in 1986 to give a presentation to the then Commander-in-Chief of Strike Command, Air Chief Marshal Sir Peter Harding, on the state of the radar, and I didn't mince my words at all. Told him exactly what the problems were, and he listened. Suffice to say that we got a wad of money, and an emergency sort of trial took place called Trial Bunbury, when we went through a whole series of exercises, trials to have a look at the radar and identify sort of in detail the deficiencies, and then fixes were sort of very quickly put in. So that all I'll say at this stage is that by the time we didn't have the final radar in any way, but by the time we got declared, I forget which one it was, stage 1 or stage 2 radars, but we gone through sort of all sorts of lists, W lists, X lists, Y lists, and things like that. So it had continually sort of being upgraded as we went through. It still was pretty punk, quite frankly, when we got declared, but it was just acceptable, and we did get declared. So we made it. And then, but that wasn't the end of the game. By this stage, we'd established the Operational Evaluation Unit, and a lot of their work was spent in detail studying the radar, and what they did led to further development of the radar. And as I say, by the time that aircraft went out of service, the radar, as far as I'm aware, because I wasn't flying it by that stage, was well, you wouldn't recognise it from what the radar that came in the first place. Night and day, yeah. I think in summary you could say that sort of we had major problems with the radar, which we didn't hide from. There are those who said you should never have taken the aircraft into service, but the aircraft was taken. I'm not a proponent of that, in fact, and I did get involved in discussions.
Okay.
And the reason why I think it should have been brought into aircraft, because I knew, you see it with every aircraft that comes into service, that don't tell the children are there. You can tell by every aircraft comes into service. When the RAF gets its hands on the kit, then they are the best people to put it right. And that, quite frankly, is exactly what happened. Yeah, it's the user. I'd seen it with the aircraft before, particularly the Jaguar. The Jaguar, they had responsibility for developing their own kit. So that's why I think it was the right decision to bring it into service, so we could get our hands on it, because it was going to come. We could get our hands on it, and we could fix it. And that's what happened. Yes, it took time, but that's what the RAF did.
Yeah, so for our viewers out there, what was, obviously you talked about the avionics and the radar, but what were the main differences between the F2 and the F3?
The main differences, I mean, look basically the same. The main differences were the aircraft was slightly longer. It had the main computer, the F2, the main computer in the F2, but think back at it from today, but it was 64K. When we got the F3, when the F3 came in, it came in with a 128K computer. So in that short time, we doubled the computer capacity, and so it went on from there. Another big difference was the fact that the F2 had a mechanical engine control unit, and the F3 came in with a digital engine control unit. And most of the other differences, as I recall, were really sort of fairly minor. I mean, from the flying point of view,
same.
They flew the same. Yeah.
Did you ever get like any input from like people at Grumman, like talk about the F-14 and their radars, or were you all completely separate? Did you ever get any input from those guys in America?
Well, we didn't on the OCU, but we remember we had the operational requirements people in London who were overseeing the program. They may well have had contact with companies like that. We at the OCU, we obviously had good contact with companies like BAE, British Aerospace it was, GEC, and companies that built the simulators, and and the Missile Management System, ESAMS it was known as. So we had plenty of contact with companies, but the overseas companies, not really, no. Right. Although on that I will say that onto the staff came, there'd been air defence people, for example, posted on exchange to America onto the F-14. And they came back onto the F-3. So they'd been working on sort of a similar sort of type aircraft, so they could bring that experience onto the aircraft. So it wasn't as if we weren't getting ideas coming from experience. We were.
And what do you think the strengths and weaknesses of the F2 was compared to the Phantom? Obviously, it's a leap forward in generation, but what was your personal experience on that?
On the F2, well, like I said, when it came in, it was a delight to fly. Its advances were obviously in the software. It was on the computers. Technologically there were advances throughout the aircraft, but put all together, as I say at the start, I mean, it wasn't operating like a Phantom a Phantom was a hugely capable aircraft. The Lightning was a lovely aircraft to fly, but its great limitation was obviously the fact that it only had 2 missiles and a gun. The F3, the Phantom had 8 missiles and a gun you put on, and plenty of range. The F3 had been designed to have plenty of range. It could carry 8 missiles, which were, the 4 of them were sort of
on the belly, weren't they?
So that carried 8 missiles, and it had an integral gun as well.
Yeah.
So all there was equal capability to the Phantom and the radar when it was up and running, because the big difference with the F2, F3 was the radar supposedly could had track while scan, and could track many targets at a time, which it could, and could better and better as time went through. But those, the advantages were not there to see at the start, shall we say.
Yeah.
So I know there were plenty of people. Well, I was disappointed. I was disappointed because I thought I hadn't realised that I was going to get an aircraft that actually didn't have half the capability that I expected it to have when it came in. For example, we were going to get auto wing sweep. The wing sweep was. I thought the wing sweep was. Manual wing sweep was not a problem, quite frankly, but an auto wing sweep, which was eventually sort of abandoned because it was just costing too much to develop.
I think the Saudis only had it, didn't they?
The Saudis had it, yeah, but I don't think it was. I don't think it was any loss really not to have it, because if you're ever flying around and you had the rings in the wrong place, you get a message through the seat of your pants anyway. So I never found that a problem.
Yeah.
I found there was a system in the F2 called the SPILS, Spin Prevention and Incidence Limiting System, which I found quite an effective system, although it did fight against you sometimes. But that was quite good, and there were lots of things in there that when they really sort of worked, eventually got working, then you saw the aircraft really sort of come into its own. When the data link arrived, and of course, again, I think it was probably cost, but it didn't go into every squadron. Only some of the squadrons had data link, but that made a big difference.
So, like, when you were flying the F2 and you brought it into service, testing the jet, would you ever go up against the Phantoms to see what the radar could do? And well,
we knew what the radar could do, but we go up against the Phantoms, yes. And we go up against everything, quite frankly. We did.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
F2, wow.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, the F2. Remember, to start with, we were developing it. We had to sort of convert to it. Then we had to sort of work up, get other people converted to the aircraft. We had to get them worked up, trained as instructors, and then converted to combat ready. And in the combat ready, that's when we really sort of went through all the sort of combat and also sort of firing the guns and firing the missiles. Firing the guns. The gun was one part of the aircraft that worked exceptionally well. We went to Cyprus to fire with the
gunnery camp.
We did that in 1986. We went down there and we did an air-to-air gunnery camp, APC, on a practice camp as they called it, and we were very successful. The gun was very effective. We scored well. In fact, at the first attempt, we won that year the trophy, the C trophy. Very nice trophy it was too, but we won it. That was an achievement. So that was a plus.
Yeah.
We went to Valley on a missile practice camp to. Then the engine. And here I must give great credit to the engineering staffs underneath my command, in particular the Sengo, who was a chap called Dave Hobart, who retired as an Air Vice Marshal. But to give you an example how he came to me, I went on my course down at Broady, my refresher course. I never met Dave, and he came up to me in the bar one night because he was at Broady at the time, and he said, "Congratulations, I hear you're going to command the Tornado OCU." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'd like to come and work for you." So I got to know, I quite liked him, in fact, so I fixed it. Wow. He came, and I take my hat off to him. He and his team, well, he led the team, but they did a quite superb job on the engineering side, working all hours of the day and night. They were, in my view, sort of a major factor in us meeting our operational declaration on time. And in particular, that included sort of the time, preparing the aircraft and the systems to be able to go and fire the missiles at Valley. I fired the first Skyflash missile at Valley.
Did you really?
I did. Yeah.
Oh, wow. What was that experience like, Rick?
It was great. Well, I'd fired missiles.
Did it work?
Yeah, it worked. Yeah. It was a look down. That didn't see the target. It was down under cloud, and it was a direct hit. Yeah.
Wow,
so that and well, if let's put it this way, if we gone to missile practice camp and the missiles hadn't worked, we wouldn't have been declared.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
But they did.
Yeah, absolutely. So what did the Phantom and the Lightning boys think of the F2 coming, into service?
Well,
were they against it, or?
I mean, I'd been a Lightning pilot as well to start with, so I knew where they were coming from, and I had flown a Lightning. I'd flown single-seat aircraft really for the first 10 years of my RAF flying, and then I came into the two-seat world. And it's different, and it does take a little bit of time to get used to the two-seat world. So they came into, and I knew that the Lightning guys would take time settling into the two-seat environment. One, and of course they were coming to an end. So they wouldn't be happy with that, and then add to that the problems we had with the aircraft. They weren't very happy to start with. No, they weren't. No, and I understood that. I did understand it, but we had to move forward. We had to move forward and try and solve the problems. Basically, that's what that was the situation we're in. We had problems, and we had to solve those problems. And just criticising them doesn't help solve problems.
Exactly, yeah. Was there much banter there? I mean, like the guys from the Lightning and the Phantom coming over to
yeah.
Did they choose, or did they just get posted there?
The Lightning guys mainly got sort of posted in.
Right.
The Phantom guys, they got posted in basically. I mean, I've selected the first few, but they all just got posted in. Yeah. So that was nothing to do with me.
Ah, right.
Nothing to do with me, and that. I saw a lot coming through because while I was boss of the OCU, we built up the OCU, and by December 1986, we'd got to a unit that we had 22 aircraft, although we were being declared with 12 aircraft, which were F3s. We still had F2s at that stage, but they weren't. It was the F3s that were declared. We had 60, 70 aircrew, on the instructional side, and in the simulators and training aids. That was we had a lot of training aids.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we did, and we had nearly 300 engineers. Yeah, so that's where we'd come from, in under 2 years. And I think that was quite an achievement.
Absolutely, yeah.
Particularly when you take into account some other factors that were thrown at us, like all the visits, like doing, and I write and we enjoyed it too, doing the Queen's birthday flypast in 1986.
That famous picture, isn't it? The Diamond Nine.
Famous Diamond Nine. People look at Diamond Nine. The weather was beautiful, looked very nice. What's a Diamond Nine? Believe me, that was a challenge. Why was it a challenge? Because we only had 10 aircraft delivered.
That's pushing it.
So we really had all 10, so we got all 10 aircraft. In fact, as I recall, one of the aircraft in the formation had a problem and the spare had to come into the formation. So we had 9 aircraft. But I think that itself was an achievement, to get everything in the air. And we did it.
Absolutely.
We were tasked to go on a visit to Jordan, for example. They wanted to sell the aircraft to Jordan, so I took several aircraft into Jordan, and also we went on a Middle East tour, a sales tour on behalf of the British government. Now all those were sort of extra things that well, we did it. I mean, basically, we did everything. We did everything. We met every challenge. I am a can-do man, and I proved that we could do. Yes, we had solved all the problems, but we were on our way to helping to solve them, and that continued, obviously, sort of through other means. But if you ask me, am I proud in what we achieved in 2 years, I'm very proud. I'm very proud of the chaps and what they achieved, and I'm very proud of everything. Notwithstanding the problems that we had, and we had huge problems.
And would you get involved in these problems as well, or did you leave it up to like a bigger team, or did you get your nose stuck in and it's like, let's solve this?
Well, I had a number of experts with me, and I was the leader, really. So I wouldn't get sort of, the detail. I'd be aware of the problems, and I'd chair meetings and things like that that were talking about the problems, and and I was obviously the leader of the decision-making process in what we were going to do about it. And I mentioned the fact that we went down to present to the Commander-in-Chief on the problems of the radar. But I had on the radar side, I had experts who were much more knowledgeable than I about things like the radar. I had experts all over the place who were more knowledgeable than I. So yes, I mean it was a team effort. Everything was a team effort, quite frankly.